Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English Spark. I'm so glad you're here today. In this series, we'll follow Ethan Blake's journey through 10 powerful chapters, from his first spark of ambition to the quiet legacy he builds. And along the way, you'll sharpen your English listening and speaking skills, boost your confidence, and practice real conversational English. Ready to light up your English journey with inspiring stories and practical practice? Let's dive in. Chapter 1: The Hollow Ambition. Ethan Blake was 24 the first time he tasted real emptiness. Picture him at a second-hand metal desk near the back window of a bland marketing agency in Portland's Pearl District. Rain pressed against the glass, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of burnt coffee lingered like a bad habit. Most people would have called it a stable job. Ethan called it a cage. Every weekday he arrived in a tailored charcoal blazer that cost more than a month of his rent. He ironed crisp white shirts at dawn, shined his shoes until they glowed, and practiced a smile in the mirror that made clients believe their mediocre campaigns might change the world. To coworkers, he seemed charismatic, maybe even arrogant, but underneath, a restless voice whispered, "You deserve more." That voice had followed him since college. Back then, he'd been the golden boy, captain of the debate team, straight-A student, the kind of son who sent his parents photos of honor roll certificates. Yet it was never grades or trophies that thrilled him. It was the attention. The way classmates glanced at his watch, the way professors nodded when he spoke, the way girlfriends clung to his arm at parties. Praise was currency, and Ethan craved a limitless supply. But praise evaporates quickly in the real world. 16 months into his marketing job, his bank account hovered just above zero after rent, loans, and the maintenance costs of looking successful. He drove an aging Civic whose check engine light winked every Monday. He covered the dashboard crack with a leather visor so that no one would notice when he offered colleagues a ride. He scrolled social media late at night, studying the city's young elite. Venture capital heirs in downtown lofts, influencers unboxing watches worth entire paychecks, and felt a sour pinch in his gut. They had respect because they had money. He had fatigue and an overdraft fee. Romance offered no refuge. Ethan dated frequently, always drawn to elegance and novelty, but the relationships collapsed under the weight of his ambition. One girlfriend called him charming until the bill arrived. Another said he looked at her the way a collector studies an antique, checking provenance, estimating value. When they left, Ethan pretended it was mutual. He told friends love could wait until fortune came first. In private, he Googled real estate listings he couldn't afford and fell asleep imagining the echo of his footsteps in marble-floored hallways. On a gray Thursday afternoon, his boss summoned him to a glass-walled office. Quarterly bonuses were postponed. A big client had walked. Ethan nodded politely, thanked her for transparency, and walked back to his desk feeling the floor tilt beneath him. He opened a spreadsheet, but the numbers blurred. Instead, he drafted a list on a yellow sticky note. Find a faster lane. Quit pretending small raises will fix a big life. Money first, comfort later. He stuck the note on his laptop, closed it, and stared at the rain clouds outside. For the first time, the whisper became a roar. Respect comes wrapped in currency, not gratitude. That night he skipped happy hour, sat alone in his studio apartment, and dissected his budget with surgical precision. Rent could drop if he found a roommate, car, insurance if he sold the Civic and leased something flashy enough to impress investors. Investors? He laughed at himself, yet the idea glimmered. Maybe he didn't need investors at all. Maybe he just needed the appearance of success long enough to attract real money. He ordered takeout noodles, ate them straight from the carton, and drafted a pitch deck for a digital branding startup that existed only in imagination. Slide after slide promised disruptive analytics, influencer synergy, exponential ROI. By midnight, his hands shook with excitement. On paper, he looked like the next hot founder. All he needed was seed capital, and if no one volunteered, he would borrow, hustle, fake until fortune caught up. As dawn crept in, Ethan glanced around the apartment, peeling wallpaper, sagging mattress, a single framed photo of his parents on graduation day. He turned the frame face down. Not because he was ashamed, he told himself, but because the look of pride in their eyes felt like pressure he no longer welcomed. Pride wouldn't pay the bills. Ambition would. He showered, dressed in yesterday's blazer, and slipped the startup deck into a leather portfolio. Before leaving, he peeled the sticky note from his laptop and slid it into his wallet where a family photo used to be. Words against worn leather. Find a faster lane. On the sidewalk, the city smelled of wet asphalt and bakery steam. Ethan inhaled deeply, squared his shoulders, and stepped into traffic with the confident stride of a man already wealthy. In truth, he had exactly $47 to his name. But he had a plan, and to him the plan felt heavier than gold. Whether that weight would build an empire or break him, well, that part of the story had yet to be written. All he knew, as he waved down a cab he couldn't afford, was that the hollow ache inside him had been replaced by a spark. And sparks, when fed enough oxygen, can burn down entire lives. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Golden Opportunity. 3 weeks after tucking his phantom startup deck into that cracked leather portfolio, Ethan Blake strolled into a Friday night gallery opening on Northwest Flanders, wearing a suit he could not yet pay off. The space smelled of fresh paint and clove cigarettes. Pendant lamps floated like little moons above polished concrete floors. Colored spotlights kissed oversized canvases that no visitor truly understood, but everyone praised with hushed awe. Ethan came alone, but he walked the room as though he owned a share of every wall. He wasn't there for art. He was there for leverage. At the bar, he ordered sparkling water, slipped the bartender a tip large enough to seem routine, then turned to scan the crowd. Portland's creative elite had answered the invitation. Venture fund founders, design agency directors, a sprinkling of local celebrities. Ethan clocked their watches, their laughter, the way they greeted one another with quick cheek kisses. Take note, he told himself. These are your future investors, if you can speak their language. Halfway through a dull conversation about augmented reality billboards, something shifted in the room's energy. A gentle hush rolled outward from the entrance like ripples on still water. Ethan followed the collective gaze and saw her. She moved with unforced grace, dark auburn hair pinned loosely, an emerald silk dress that caught the light in tidal waves. Instead of stiletto heels, she wore simple leather flats, as though ready to walk a mile if the art was worth it. People greeted her with careful enthusiasm, the way one greets a benefactor rather than a friend. Isabel Hart. Ethan recognized the name from magazine blurbs about the Hart family's West Coast Art Restoration Trust. Rumor placed her inheritance in the high 8 figures, complete with a cliffside estate somewhere near Cannon Beach. Most importantly, she seemed untouched by the city's performative swagger. She carried herself like someone who knew she had nothing to prove. Ethan's pulse jumped. That, he thought, is the door I need to open. He timed his approach. First, he laughed warmly at a stranger's joke, louder than necessary, to appear magnetic. Then he drifted toward a large abstract painting, precisely where Isabel paused to study the brushwork. Looks like rain frozen mid-storm, he offered, voice low but confident. She turned, eyebrows lifted. Or maybe a bird's-eye view of river deltas, she countered with a half-smile. Either way, it makes me want to travel, Ethan said. I'm Ethan. Isabel, she replied, shaking his hand with a grip neither weak nor guarded. Travel often, do you? Not as often as I plan to, he lied smoothly. But as soon as my next venture scales, I'm taking a month to wander Italy. What kind of venture? She asked, not with investor suspicion, but genuine curiosity. Predictive branding analytics, he said, the phrase rolling off his tongue like a practiced melody. We help ethical startups find audiences who care. Isabel's eyes brightened at the word ethical. That sounds timely. The market is flooded with empty promises. Ethan felt the hook set. For the next 20 minutes, they discussed local nonprofit campaigns, green tech disruptions, the best espresso in the city. He sidestepped personal finance questions, steering instead toward values, stories, laughter. She laughed easily, and every time she did, Ethan mentally measured the distance between aspiration and achievement. Get close, the inner strategist insisted, but don't reveal the goal. Near closing time, Isabel pulled her phone from a small canvas clutch. I'm hosting a private showing next Thursday. New Haitian sculptures. You should come. She typed her number into his phone before he could respond. Text me for details. He pocketed the device, kept his voice calm. Wouldn't miss it. As the crowd thinned, Ethan slipped outside. Cold night air slapped his flushed cheeks, and he allowed himself one unguarded grin. First contact made. The plan advanced faster than anticipated, yet, walking toward the max line, doubts nipped at his heels. Isabel's candor disarmed him. She seemed more interested in authenticity than status. Would she still smile once she learned his confidence was underwritten by maxed-out credit? He pushed the thought away. Perception is reality, until reality catches up. He only needed to maintain the illusion long enough to secure a foothold. Over the weekend, Ethan researched everything publicly available on Isabel Hart. Her mother's background in textile conservation, her late father's shipping investments, her volunteer work teaching art to refugee kids on Mondays. The more he learned, the more his narrative engine whirred, crafting compliments and shared passions that would feel spontaneous when delivered. On Tuesday, he leased, on 30-day promotion terms, a vintage Alfa Romeo convertible, cherry red, impeccable chrome. Payments would bleed him dry in 3 months, but 3 months was a lifetime in ambition years. He also bought a second-hand Italian leather briefcase and filled it with glossy mock-ups of his fledgling company, each cover page boasting graphs that leaned sharply upward. Thursday arrived. He trimmed his beard, knotted a navy silk tie, and rehearsed soft anecdotes about childhood museum trips that never happened. At the private showing, Isabel greeted him with that same unguarded smile. The sculptures, twisting metal forms accented with shards of sea glass, were breathtaking. But Ethan studied her more than the art. The way she tilted her head, the way she lingered at any piece that carried a story of resilience. Mid-evening, she introduced him to her half-brother, Graham Hart, a broad-shouldered man whose handshake felt like a background check. Graham's eyes flicked to the Alpha's keys peeking from Ethan's pocket, then to Ethan's watch, then back to his face. Polite nod, measured silence. A silent verdict postponed. Undeterred, Ethan charmed donors, traded cards, promised pro bono analytics for the Foundation's upcoming online auction. By the time lights dimmed, Isabel invited him for late-night coffee at a riverside bistro. They talked until chairs were stacked around them, and when she finally waved for a rideshare, she squeezed his hand. Tonight was lovely. Portland needs more people who care about impact, not just income. Ethan forced a modest shrug, though the compliment felt like absolution he hadn't earned. Impact, not income. The irony tasted bitter, but he swallowed it whole. He couldn't afford second thoughts. Opportunity rarely knocked twice. Back in his studio at 2 a.m., he dropped the keys onto a wobbly table and sat in darkness, heart rattling with a cocktail of triumph and unease. Isabel Hart trusted the person he pretended to be. Now the trick was simple. Transform pretense into reality before she noticed the seams. He opened his laptop, stared at the glow, and whispered the vow aloud. 3 months. Close the funding, lock the future, make the lie come true. Rain drummed softly on the window, steady, relentless, like the ambition that drove him forward into whatever promise and peril the golden opportunity would demand. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Tying the Knot. 8 months slid past in a blur of gallery nights, brunch fundraisers, and carefully curated selfies that made Ethan Blake look like the poster child for conscious capitalism. By day, he peddled branding miracles to small eco-startups, collecting modest consulting fees just large enough to cover interest on the Alpha. By night, he escorted Isabel Hart through Portland's art scene, each outing cementing his role as the charming strategist who spoke fluent philanthropy. Their connection felt effortless in public. She quoted Rilke over rooftop cider. He countered with Oscar Wilde lines cribbed from a phone note. In private, she cooked lentil stews in her plant-filled apartment while he rehearsed investor calls in the next room, one ear tuned to the simmering pot so he could time casual compliments about the aroma. Yet beneath the laughter, a quiet meter in Ethan's mind tracked expenditures against expected returns. The longer he stayed, the more urgent the payoff had to be. One chill November evening, Isabel suggested a weekend at her family's coastal retreat, an angular, cedar-clad house hugging a cliff near Cannon Beach. The drive wound through fog-draped evergreens, Waves hammered the rocks below like distant drums. Inside, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Pacific, and every surface smelled faintly of salt and sandalwood. For the first time, Ethan felt the solidity of her lineage. Oil paintings by regional masters, a grand piano untouched since her mother's passing, a wine cellar older than his student loans. That night, after a fire pit dinner beneath a blanket of stars, Isabel pressed a seashell into his palm. "Dad taught me to listen to the ocean through these," she whispered. "He said it reminds us the world is bigger than whatever we're worried about." Ethan, 2 glasses of Pinot in, felt the shell's whirls and wondered if she could hear the gallop of his pulse. She looked at him with a softness that made calculation impossible. For one reckless instant, he pictured waking up here every morning, watching storms roll in with no debt collectors in sight. Back in Portland, momentum quickened. December brought frost on car windows and invitations to holiday galas where Ethan introduced Isabel to prospective angel partners. He loved how their eyes widened when she mentioned the Heart Trust, as if money might rub off merely by proximity. Graham Hart noticed too. At a New Year's Eve benefit, Graham cornered Ethan beside the silent auction table. "Isabel believes in you," he said, voice low. "But belief alone doesn't protect her." He glanced at the Alpha's key fob peeking from Ethan's pocket. "What exactly do you believe in, Mr. Blake?" "Impact," Ethan answered, matching the older man's steadiness with a practiced smile. "And building a life where impact can flourish." Graham studied him a beat too long, then nodded once, an ambiguous gesture that felt like a sealed envelope Ethan might never get to open. Winter melted into a moist Portland spring. Ethan's lease on the Alpha came due. He refinanced at punishing terms and told himself it was the last extension he would need. Clients paid late, and his credit card sagged, but whenever Isabel asked how business was going, he flashed graphs on his laptop, projections looping skyward like fireworks. The truth was simpler. He was weeks from insolvency, kept afloat by charisma, deferrals, and a savings account he'd emptied down to coins. He needed a leap, a declaration so bold it would force Graham and every hesitant investor into acceptance. So on a rain-silvered April night, Ethan invited Isabel to the Japanese garden after hours, having bribed a groundskeeper for private access. Paper lanterns lined the moon bridge. Cherry blossoms drifted in soft spirals. In the clearing by the koi pond, he knelt on one knee and presented a platinum ring set with an ethically sourced diamond he had financed at 18% APR. Isabel's hands flew to her mouth. "Ethan?" "Yes." She laughed and cried in the same breath, pulling him up into petals and lantern light. In that moment, Under a canopy of pink snow, Ethan felt weightless, until the groundskeeper coughed politely to indicate their hour was over, and reality settled back onto his shoulders. Wedding planning unfolded at lightning speed, propelled by Isabel's excitement and Ethan's urgent arithmetic. The ceremony would take place at the Cliff House in late July, seaside vows at sunset, string quartet, farm-to-table feast. Costs spiraled, but Graham covered deposits without blinking. He remained cordial, yet something in his eyes said, "I'm paying to see how this ends." Ethan doubled his hustle. Dawn meetings, midnight emails, espresso I faux. He pitched 7 venture funds. 3 laughed, 2 ghosted, 1 requested audited statements he couldn't produce, and the last offered a token. Check contingent on matching capital he didn't have. Creditors called. He let them ring out. Isabel planned flower arrangements, tasting menus, a honeymoon trek through Patagonia. Ethan rehearsed gratitude, promised it would all be reimbursed after his next funding tranche. July arrived in icy-eyed in a blaze of coastal sunshine. Guests filled white chairs on the cliff lawn. Gulls wheeled overhead. Isabel walked the aisle in a chiffon gown, wind tugging a loose curl across her smile. Ethan, in a linen suit tailored to a body 10 pounds lighter from stress, watched her approach and told himself this was victory. Vows were spoken, rings exchanged, cheers lifted into the salt air. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her and tasted the ocean on her lips. At twilight, Graham offered a toast beneath strings of Edison bulbs. "To my sister," he began, voice steady, "whose heart is as vast as the sea, and to Ethan, may you always cherish that depth." Glasses clinked. Then Graham's eyes locked on Ethan. "Remember, deep water can nurture, but it can also drown." A ripple of polite laughter masked the warning no one else seemed to catch. 2 weeks later, invoices flooded Ethan's inbox. Catering balance, tent rental, quartet overtime, photographic rights. He forwarded them all to Graham's accountant, with a note, "Per our agreement." The reply came within minutes. "Mr. Hart has requested that future financial matters be directed to you and Isabel jointly." Confused, Ethan phoned Isabel. She sounded breathless. She'd just finished a mural session at a youth center. "Graham called this morning," she said, "and transferred the Cliff House into a conservation trust. He thinks it should serve the community, not sit empty." "Isn't that wonderful?" Ethan's stomach lurched. "Does that include operating funds?" "Operating funds?" she echoed. "Everything's covered by the trust, I think." "Why?" He closed his eyes, pressing fingers to his temples. "No reason, just making sure." That evening, Graham sent a single text. "Congratulations on the marriage. Wealth is measured in trust, not currency. Guard hers well." Ethan stared at the words until the screen dimmed. The golden gates he'd chased had shifted, revealing iron bars of obligation he hadn't anticipated. Isabel, radiant and unsuspecting, believed their future was framed by love and shared purpose. Ethan knew the bills were framed by interest and late fees. Wedding photos arrived, sunlit smiles, rings flashing, two silhouettes against a flaming horizon. He slipped one into his wallet beside the sticky note that still read, "Find a faster lane." The lane had narrowed to a tightrope, and below it waited a sea not of promise but of debt. As he lay beside his sleeping wife that night, waves pounding the cliff beyond open windows, Ethan Blake whispered into the dark, 3 months. Make the lie come true. The Pacific answered with a roar, indifferent, unending, and impossibly deep. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Fractured Foundations. Married life began in a sun-splashed loft over Portland's riverfront esplanade. 2 bedrooms, brick walls, rent prepaid by Graham Hart as a final wedding gift. Ethan told himself it was a temporary launch pad until his predictive branding empire delivered its first real windfall. Isabel filled the space with thrift store plants and secondhand books that smelled of dust and possibility. Ethan installed a designer espresso machine he couldn't fully afford and lined the shelves with crystal tumblers, because a rising mogul should pour bourbon in the proper glass. For a month, they glided through an Instagram dream. Morning jogs across the steel bridge, late-night tacos from food carts, slow Sunday dances to Coltrane on vinyl. Isabel glowed. Ethan posed. But each time the mail slot snapped, Ethan's pulse spiked. Bills for the Alpha, Tux rental, and honeymoon deposits stacked like thin white gravestones on the kitchen counter. He swept them into a drawer Isabel rarely opened. Clients, meanwhile, paid slower than ever. 2 startups folded before remitting final invoices. A third bartered partial equity for services. Equity Ethan could not eat or wire to Visa. Yet he kept promising Isabel adventures. A Patagonia. Trek next spring, a Paris residency she'd always dreamed of. She hugged him and said she could wait. He replied, "Why wait when we can build?" Late September delivered the first real crack. Isabel suggested postponing Patagonia to finish a mural project at the youth center. Ethan smiled, but his jaw clenched. Postponing meant refunds. Refunds meant creditors. And creditors meant needles under his fingernails. That night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, replaying Graham's toast. Deep water can nurture, but it can also drown. 2. Weeks later, Isabel's bank card was declined at a grocery checkout. She brushed it off as a system glitch, paid in cash, and brought home pumpkin ravioli for dinner. Ethan barely tasted it. He was busy drafting an emergency pitch for a green crypto incubator he invented over lunch. The next morning, she asked about the card. He said some merger at the bank must have scrambled accounts. She kissed his cheek, trusting the explanation, then left for her studio shift. That afternoon, he secured a meeting with Dominic Shaw, a venture broker notorious for fast money and looser morals. They met in a microdistillery tasting room draped in Edison bulbs. Dominic listened to Ethan's green crypto spiel, tapped ash into an empty rocks glass, and smirked. Cute deck, 30-day raise, 5 million minimum, blind shell companies, no questions asked. He slid a laminated card across the barrel-top table. You'll need offshore compliance signatures. They cost extra. You won't regret it. Ethan pretended to hesitate, then nodded. Fractured foundation became blueprint. The next morning, he transferred the last of his consulting revenue into a joint account to keep rent afloat. Isabel found the deposit alert on her phone and texted, "You're amazing. Don't forget to breathe." He thumb-typed, "All good. Big things ahead." Then he toggled to Dominic's encrypted app, arranging the first tranche of illicit funds at 18% cut. October rains arrived. Ethan spent nights in rooftop lounges courting speculators. Isabel spent them sketching whales for a children's hospital mural. When she woke at dawn to brew oolong, he smelled of cedar cologne and exhaustion. She cupped his face, asked if he was overworking. He kissed her forehead and joked, "Hustle sleeps after IPO." Halloween morning, the Alpha disappeared, towed for 3 months of unpaid tickets. Ethan claimed it was scheduled maintenance. Isabel offered her bike. He laughed it off and leased a black Tesla under the crypto shell's name, burying the down payment on yet another credit card. Debt notices finally reached Isabel in mid-November. She stood in the doorway holding 2 envelopes, one from the tuxedo vendor, the other from the honeymoon lodge demanding final payment. "I thought Graham covered the wedding," she said, voice small. Ethan's stomach fell through the hardwood. He spun a tale about vendor overcharges, promised to reconcile numbers, swept her into a quick hug, and dashed to another investor brunch. That brunch became a blur of bottomless mimosa deals. Ethan pitched returns so high the room tilted, scribbled fake term sheets, collected checks made out to shell LLCs. He texted Dominic a flame emoji. Dominic replied with a thumbs up and a Cayman account number. The next night, Isabel waited with lentil stew and candles. Ethan arrived at 1:30 a.m., smelling of smoked rosemary and single malt. She touched his arm. "Sit, eat, talk to me." He stared at the flickering wick and saw a ledger instead of flame. "Tomorrow," he muttered, slipping into the shower, letting hot water drown the questions. December's first storm cut power across the city. In candlelight, Isabel found the drawer Ethan thought she'd never open. Bills fanned out like feathers of some dead mechanical bird. Overdue statements, repossession threats, a final notice from the alpha lender. When electricity flickered back, she sat on the couch, letters stacked on her knees, and waited. Ethan walked in dripping rain, designer coat pasted to his shoulders. She handed him the stack without a word. The silence felt cavernous. He cleared. His throat reached for the usual story, but her eyes, soft, bewildered, shimmering, pulled every script from his head. "I can fix it," he managed. "Fix what?" she whispered. "The numbers or the truth?" A gust rattled the window. For one fragile second he considered confession. Dominic, the shell accounts, the void yawning under their marriage. Instead, pride tightened its fist. "Trust me," he said. Isabel stood, tears unstinting. "I did." She walked to the bedroom, shut the door, and turned the lock for the first time in their marriage. Ethan sank onto the sofa, soaked coat spreading a dark stain. Outside, wind keened through brick alleys. Inside, the loft felt impossibly large, as though the walls had pulled back to expose the emptiness he'd spent months disguising. At 2 a.m., Dominic texted, "Paperwork filed. First wave clears tomorrow. Celebrate." Ethan stared at the glowing screen. The money was coming, yes, but so was a storm no banquet hall or platinum ring could keep out. He rose, crossed the room, and pressed a palm to the locked bedroom door. 3 months, he whispered to the wood grain. Just 3 more. From the other side came only quiet breathing and the slow, splintering sound of trust eroding in the dark. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Fatal Shortcut. New Year's morning broke with a bruised pink sky, and Ethan Blake welcomed it from Dominic Shaw's penthouse balcony, a half-empty flute of champagne sweating in his hand. Below, Portland's skyline glimmered, with fresh resolutions, but Ethan's were already inked. Move faster, grow bolder, never look back. Dominic clapped him on the shoulder. "First quarter we crack 8 million, he promised, cigarette ember flaring. "Just keep the story tight." The story, the Green Horizon Fund, was brilliant in its simplicity. Invest in carbon neutral, shipping startups, guarantee 40% returns, showcase a website full of stock photo oceans and forged audit seals. Money sluiced in from dentists, yoga studio owners, even a retired jazz drummer who liquidated his pension after Ethan's smooth webinar pitch. Each deposit landed in a Cayman sub-account before anyone finished reading the fine print. By mid-February, Ethan's dashboards glowed lime green. 600,000, then 9, then 11. He wired delinquent wedding vendors, rescued the Tesla lease, and replaced the espresso machine's leaking gasket with a gold-plated upgrade Isabel hadn't asked for. "Where did this come from?" she giggled. "Referral bonus," he lied, spilling latte art into her favorite mug. Yet the bills weren't the only thing multiplying. One rainy Thursday, Isabel emerged from the bathroom holding a white stick and trembling like a tuning fork. "Ethan," she whispered, "we're having a baby." The word baby ricocheted around his skull like a stray bullet. Cribs, tuition, trust funds, exposure. He forced a grin so wide it hurt. "Perfect timing," he said, hugging her while his mind flipped through spreadsheets looking for space to hide a family. That night, Dominic texted a voice memo. Regulators sniffing. "We fast-track Phase 2. Crypto real estate loop, triple yield." Ethan's pulse thrummed. A baby meant legacy. Legacy demanded a throne, not a loft with second-hand ferns. He typed back, all in, before the thought could curdle. March roared. Ethan leased a second office, a glass box co-working suite overlooking Pioneer Square, so investors could photograph themselves beside potted bamboo and a wall of mission statements. He hired a pair of freelancers to pose as analysts, paying them coffee stipends to recite bullet points about blockchain escrow. Meanwhile, Isabel painted a nursery sunrise on the spare bedroom wall, humming old folk songs while the tiny heartbeat fluttered on her phone's ultrasound app. Graham Hart noticed the escalation. He invited Ethan to coffee on a wet Wednesday. No lawyers, no accountants, just 2 lattes steaming between them. "How does a boutique brand consultant pivot into global fund management overnight?" Graham asked, tone politely surgical. Ethan unleashed jargon, synergies, decentralization, Silicon Valley angel nodes, until the older man leaned back and sighed. "Isabel trusts you. I'm asking whether I should." Ethan's smile never wavered. "Judge me by the results." Graham nodded, but his eyes darkened like tide pools before a storm. The storm arrived in April. A mid-level compliance officer at Horizon Bank attempted to verify one of Ethan's supposed shipping startups and found an empty warehouse. She escalated the discrepancy. The report landed on Graham's desk. Banks like the Hart Trust share plenty of friends. That evening, Graham called Ethan. "You have 48 hours to explain why your flagship investment doesn't exist." Ethan's tongue felt glued. He promised a full dossier by Friday, hung up, and rang Dominic. Voicemail. again and again. Panic sluiced through him. He drove the Tesla to Dominic's condo. The lobby keycard failed. Upstairs, lights were out, mailbox overflowing. On the elevator ride down, Ethan saw his own reflection, tie askew, pupils blown wide, and hated the man staring back. Back home, Isabel was assembling a flat-pack crib. "Can you hold this screw?" she asked, smiling beneath a streak of paint on her cheek. He mumbled something about deadlines, retreated to the balcony, and dialed every encrypted number Dominic had ever used. The city lights blurred as wind whipped the phone's ringtone into the night. Thursday morning, he donned his sharpest suit and marched into the co-working office, determined to conjure legitimacy from thin air. But the reception area was crowded with unfamiliar faces. 2 SEC agents flanked by stern Portland police detectives. Someone must have tipped them seconds earlier, because Dominic's analysts were already gone, laptops wiped, coffee still steaming. The taller agent stepped forward. "Ethan Blake, we need you to come with us." Every investor selfie flashed before Ethan's eyes. The jazz drummer, the yoga teacher, the retiree with shaky hands signing wire forms. "There's a misunderstanding," he began, voice cracking. Cold steel tightened around his wrists. Phones shot upward, shutters clicked. Somewhere a reporter shouted a question about eco-fraud. Ethan felt the floor drop as they nudged him through the lobby, past tentative applause from cynical freelancers who loved a public downfall. The ride to Federal Holdings smelled of vinyl and defeat. Rain lashed the van windows. Ethan tried one more call to Dominic. Number disconnected. At the detention center, his belt, watch, and wedding ring clattered into a plastic tray. The guard caught Ethan's gaze. "Got a call you want logged?" Ethan hesitated, then recited Isabel's number. Voicemail again. He pictured her humming in the half-finished nursery, oblivious to sirens screaming across town. Interrogation blurred, dates, signatures, shell LLCs he'd forgotten naming. "Where's Shaw?" they pressed. "Who else conspired?" Ethan's answers skittered like marbles on tile, half-truths rolling nowhere. By dawn, they booked him on securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, maximum 20 years. Bail impossible without verifiable assets. One agent shoved a stack of investor affidavits across the table. Ethan recognized shaky handwriting pledging grandkids' college funds. His stomach revolted. He barely reached the trash can. In a holding cell that reeked of bleach and hopelessness, Ethan sat on a steel cot clutching his knees. Neon light buzzed overhead. Somewhere beyond cinder blocks, Isabel's heartbeat monitor blinked in rhythmic innocence. He pressed knuckles to his eyes until constellations burst behind his lids. "I did this for them," he told himself, but even his thoughts laughed at the lie. Hours later, a guard announced a visitor. Ethan shuffled into a booth divided by plexiglass. Graham Hart stood there, coat drenched, expression carved from granite. "Isabel's resting," he said. "No greeting. She knows only that you've been detained for questioning. Decide what she learns next." Ethan leaned toward the glass. "I can fix it," he whispered, voice ragged. Graham's eyes hardened. "You can't fix theft with promises. People trusted you. She trusted you." He slid a folded sheet through the tray. "Investor list. Every name, every dollar. Find a way to repay them, or prison will be the least of your sentences." He turned to leave, then paused. "The child deserves better than a legacy of lies. Think about that while you count your minutes." When the door slammed, Ethan unfolded the sheet. Names upon names, dentists, teachers, his own college roommate. The total at the bottom eclipsed 7 million. The digits blurred as tears threatened, but none fell. He felt hollow, like someone had scooped out his lungs and left an echo chamber of regret. Back in the cell, he lay on the cot, Graham's list pressed to his chest like a lead blanket. From the corridor came the rhythmic clank of bars and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Cold, relentless, exact. Ethan stared at the ceiling until the pattern of holes resembled ocean foam. And for the first time since he borrowed that old blazer to impress a gallery crowd, he admitted a truth he could no longer outrun. The shortcut wasn't a bridge, it was a blade. And he had walked the edge until it cut straight through the world he claimed to love. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Locked Behind Bars. The county jail processed Ethan Blake on a gray April evening, photographing him against a cinder block wall that smelled of bleach and resignation. They clipped away his pocket square, scraped gel from his hair, and exchanged his Italian suit for orange polyester 2 sizes too large. A guard recorded his watch, ring and belt as personal effects, then slid them into a plastic bag marked property of state. Watching the ring disappear, Ethan felt the first true tremor of panic, but he swallowed it, folded his shoulders back, and walked the corridor as though it were another marble hallway he intended to conquer. His cell measured 8 paces long, 5 paces wide, containing a steel bunk, a stainless steel toilet, and a window the width of a paperback. Beyond the glass hung a scrap of sky the color of wet ash. Ethan sat on the lower bunk, palms on his knees, heartbeat loud as drums in an empty stadium. He tried to calculate bail, lawyer fees, reputational triage, but numbers unraveled in his head like faulty code because time was the only currency here, and he owned none of it. The first night, An inmate nicknamed Snowcap slid an extra blanket through the bars. "Welcome to County," he muttered. Ethan thanked him with the clipped politeness he once reserved for valet staff, then lay awake tracing cracks in the ceiling paint. Somewhere down the tier, a man sobbed until guards shouted him quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed even after the overheads dimmed. Ethan realized he would learn to fear that hum. It erased natural time, leaving only institutional minutes that stretched and snapped like old rubber bands. Morning came by loudspeaker. "Count!" Doors clanged, boots thudded, bodies shuffled. Breakfast was beige grits and a plastic spoon. Ethan gagged at the first bite, earning a laugh from a hulking man who called himself Diesel. "Marketing boy better toughen up," Diesel said. Ethan forced the spoon back to his lips. Humiliation tasted like salt and metal. After arraignment, no. Bail, flight risk. His public defender, a weary woman named Ms. Herrera, visited the holding pen. "Full trial could take a year," she warned. "Federal task force has 7 million in claimant statements and a cooperating witness." Ethan's pulse vaulted. "Dominic Shaw?" She nodded. "He's cutting a deal. He says you masterminded everything." The room tilted. Ethan gripped the bench until his knuckles blanched. Ms. Herrera slid a notepad toward him. "Plea to wire fraud. 3 to 5 years. Restitution schedule. Possible early release if you cooperate." Ethan felt the old reflex. Talk fast, sell. The future. Surge up his throat, but words collapsed into dust. 3 to 5 years meant missing the birth of his child, missing everything. Yet the alternative was worse. He signed his name, the pen trembling in his fingers like a broken compass. Weeks blurred into ritual. 5 a.m. count. Powdered eggs. Recreation yard ringed in razor wire. Ethan started running slow laps, lungs burning, numbers pounding through. His skull, 7 million owed, at 8% interest if judgment stuck. He had to design a plan, even here. He borrowed paper from the chapel, charted business structures, exit options, hypothetical apologies. At night, he shoved the pages under his mattress, terrified they looked too much like contraband ambition. On a damp Tuesday, day 41, an officer tapped the bars. Visitor. Ethan's throat tightened. He imagined Isabel, round with pregnancy, eyes bright with either forgiveness or fire. Instead, his father, Martin Blake, stepped into the booth, raincoat dripping, hair gone grayer than Ethan remembered. They picked up the phones on opposite sides of smeared plexiglass. "Your mother sends her love," Martin began, voice soft. Ethan tried to answer but managed only a croak. Martin's gaze stayed gentle yet firm. Son, I don't care about the money. I care that you learn why you wanted it so badly. Ethan's jaw trembled because respect, real respect, Martin interrupted, starts the moment you stop chasing mirrors. Silence stretched. Finally, Ethan whispered, "Tell Mom I'm sorry I broke everything." Martin's eyes glistened. Nothing's broken forever, Ethan. Some things just need rebuilding from the foundation. They pressed hands to glass. Fathers, steady, sons shaking until the guard called time. 2 months later, a letter arrived, forwarded from the loft. Isabel's handwriting slanted across the cheap envelope. Ethan, our daughter is due in 3 weeks. Doctor says she's strong. I will name her Maya Ocean Blake. Maya for strength. Ocean for the place we once dreamed together. I'm scared, but I'm not alone. Community art friends bring groceries. Graham handles insurance. I want you to know I still believe people can change. Maybe prison will teach you what freedom couldn't. Take care. Isabel. The words ocean and change burned holes through Ethan's chest. He kept rereading the letter until the paper thinned at the folds. That night, he skipped chow, sitting cross-legged on the bunk and whispering, Maya, until the name felt like a plea. Summer heat seeped through concrete. Ethan took a job in the laundry, folding uniforms beside Snowcap, who turned out to be a former CPA busted for embezzlement. They spoke in numbers, compounding interest, restitution tiers, credit attrition. Snowcap said, knowledge is leverage. Use prison as an education, not a grave. Ethan filed the sentence like scripture. September finally delivered sentencing. 40 months in federal prison, first-time offender credit possible, followed by 3 years supervised release. In the courtroom, he wore a loner suit, wrists shackled. Isabel attended by video, her newborn swaddled in sea blue. Ethan looked into the camera. The infant yawned, unaware. His voice cracked as he said, I'm sorry. The judge stared over rimless glasses. Regret is measured by action. Mr. Blake, we'll see what you build with the years left. That evening, the transfer bus rolled south toward FCI Sheridan. Through a barred window, Ethan watched fir trees blur into a smear of green twilight. In his shirt pocket lay Isabel's letter, corners frayed, words fading. He pressed it to his heart and whispered to the rattling axle, I miss the shortcut to everything that mattered. Ahead waited endless nights, steel doors, and the slow geometry of redemption, if he could find the blueprint. As the bus rumbled deeper into darkness, Ethan Blake finally closed his eyes, not to dream of wealth, but to remember the sound of waves crashing beneath a cliff-top vow he had broken and might one day, brick by brick, learn to rebuild. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. A Glimpse of Hope. Federal Correctional Institution. Sheridan rose from the Oregon farmland like a slab of poured grief. Razor wire, guard towers, window slits no wider than a hand. Ethan Blake arrived in a khaki jumpsuit, carrying everything he owned in one clear plastic bag: a cheap toothbrush, 2 bars of soap, and the creased letter announcing his daughter's birth. A CO herded the new arrivals down a corridor that smelled of floor wax and old despair, then into orientation, where a sergeant barked rules about counts, call-outs, and contraband. Ethan listened, but the only words that stuck were good time. 54 days shaved for each year served if an inmate stayed clean. A clock had appeared on his horizon, distant but visible. The first weeks were survival geometry. He memorized the yard schedule, the commissary line, the respectful nod angle that meant I'm not prey, but I'm not a threat. Nights he replayed Isabel's video image from sentencing, her tired smile, Maya's tiny fist. He pressed the letter to his chest until sweat ghosted the ink. When loneliness howled, he whispered his daughter's name like a password no one else could hear. Then, on day 39, a counselor handed him a trifold brochure. Prisoner Entrepreneurship Program. Build skills, build restitution, build a life. Ethan flipped through photos of men in graduation caps holding business plans. Some fragile filament inside him vibrated. He signed up on the spot. Class met in the old chapel twice a week. Folding tables, stubby pencils, a volunteer instructor named Mr. Alvarez who had once run a Portland hardware chain. 12 inmates gathered: car thieves, dope runners, a former vet who'd hacked bank servers. In that mixed company, Ethan felt equal parts fraud and ferocious intent. The program covered marketing, ethics, and personal finance, topics he could teach, but Alvarez insisted everyone start at zero. "You're here because the shortcuts failed," he said, chalk squeaking on a board faded with scripture. "Now, we do the long work." Ethan swallowed pride and took notes like a novice. He drafted a plan for a post-release consultancy that offered transparent, low-cost digital campaigns to mom-and-pop stores burned by predatory agencies. The antithesis of everything Green Horizon had been. Alvarez circled each sentence that sounded like jargon and wrote "Speak Human" in the margin. Ethan rewrote, simplified, revised again. Slowly, his pitch shed glitter and grew substance. Autumn painted the yard maples red. One evening after count, a CO stopped at Ethan's cell. Mail. Inside the envelope, a photo of Maya at 6 months, cheeks round as peaches, eyes eclipsed by a tuft of dark hair. On the back, Isabel had penned, "She learns to roll over. I learn new patience. We both wait for you to learn new truth." Ethan's knees buckled onto the bunk. He stared until the guard's keys jingled down the tier, then, trembling, pinned the picture to the cork strip above his desk. From that day, his routine sharpened. Dawn workout, GED tutoring duty. Snowcap had persuaded the education officer to let Ethan teach basic budgeting to younger inmates. Entrepreneurship class, lights, out. He quit ramen debt poker. He wrote weekly letters to Maya, simple stories about clouds and pine needles and why the moon sometimes followed the car, though he wasn't sure Isabel would read them aloud. Still, each envelope felt like a brick laid toward a bridge. December brought a mediation conference with the Justice Department's Victim Restoration Unit. Ethan sat in a video booth. On the screen, 3 defrauded investors chose to confront him. The jazz drummer spoke first, voice quivering but fearless. "You stole my encore years. Why?" Ethan's rehearsed defenses evaporated. He managed, "I saw people as ladders, not lives. I'm sorry." Second came the retired teacher who had cashed out her annuity. She asked if his child would ever forgive him. He didn't know, but vowed to try. When it ended, the facilitator said most claimants felt moderately validated. The phrase sounded clinical, yet Ethan clung to it like sunlight. New Year's Day inside Sheridan began with scrambled powder eggs and black and white TV coverage of Rose Parade floats. At afternoon rec, an unexpected call-out summoned Ethan to the admin building. Graham Hart waited in a glassed interview room, suit damp from winter rain. No pleasantries. He slid across a thick envelope, notarized documents for a civil settlement. Trust. You pay restorative dividends from any legitimate earnings after release, Graham said. The victims see repayments quarterly. Fail once, the trust seizes your share, and I testify at every future parole hearing. Ethan's fingers tingled as he flipped through clauses. It was a lifeline woven with barbed wire. Why help me? At all? He asked. For Isabel, Graham answered, and because my father believed even reckless men can choose a second horizon. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly. Make this one real. That night, Ethan drafted a fresh budget. Commissary limits, course certificates, restitution projections starting the day he stepped outside the fence. Hope, he discovered, was math, numbers aligned with integrity. Spring arrived in pale slivers of pink and gold. Mr. Alvarez announced pitch day finals, judges visiting from Portland business circles. Ethan rehearsed until his throat rasped. When the day came, he stood in prison khakis before a panel that included a venture capital associate, a credit union director, and a soft-spoken nonprofit head. His hands shook, but his voice held steady. He confessed his crimes in the opening minute, then mapped a pathway of honesty. Tiered fees, open-source analytics dashboards, profit shares earmarked for restitution and community grants. He closed, with Maya's photo on the final slide. "My daughter is the KPI," he said. "Every quarter she will ask if her dad kept his promises." Silence. Then the credit union director tapped a pen. "When you re-enter, call me. We finance microloans for returning citizens." The VC nodded, scribbling notes. Alvarez beamed like a proud uncle. Weeks later, Ethan graduated top of the cohort, tassel snipped from a cloth scrap, applause echoing against cinder block walls. He mailed the certificate to Isabel with a single line, "Learning the long work. Thank you for still believing people can change, E." Her reply arrived 2 months after. A crayon drawing by Maya, 3 stick figures, 1 holding balloons, all beneath a giant sun. On the margin, Isabel had written, "She says the tall one is Daddy." A laugh burst from Ethan's chest, startling his bunkie. He pinned the artwork next to the photo, a constellation of reasons not to fail. Late summer dusk bathed the yard in amber. Ethan jogged slow laps, lungs easy, mind clearer than it had been in years. Over the fence, mountains glowed violet, hinting at places beyond razor coils. As he rounded the final corner, Snowcap called after him, "MBA boy, clock's still running, but you're gaining ground." Ethan smiled, not the polished grin he once weaponized, but something smaller, steadier. Each step measured restitution. Each breath rehearsed patience. Freedom remained months away, yet for the first time the horizon felt earned, not stolen. Under the prison yard lights, Ethan whispered to the cooling air, "I'll see you soon. Maya Ocean. And when I do, the long work will already be underway." The wind carried no answer, but it lifted something inside him. No longer hollow ambition, but a glimpse of hope sturdy enough to build on. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Fresh Out. Cold World. The gate at FCI Sheridan clanged open on the last Thursday of October, 2 years and 9 months after Ethan Blake arrived. He stepped across the painted yellow line at 6:04 a.m. with a state-issue duffel, $53 in release funds, and a single address scribbled on a voucher. Bridgeview Reentry House, SE 11th Avenue, Portland. A dawn fog hugged the fields. The bus smelled of diesel and wet vinyl. Ethan pressed his forehead to the window and watched razor wire shrink into silver scribbles against the hills, wondering how long the sense of unfinished sentence would trail behind him. Portland greeted him with rain so fine it felt like static. The driver dropped him under the Burnside Bridge and pointed south. Ethan walked, jumpsuit traded for donated chinos that hung loose on his hips. Storefronts he once pitched to were boarded up or replaced by neon bubble tea shops. QR codes glowed on windows. Every passerby scrolled on a phone model he'd never seen. He felt 90, not 31, as if the world had sprinted ahead while he was still lacing shoes. Bridgeview offered a bunk bed, a locker, and strict curfews. The counselor handed him paperwork, then nodded toward a community bulletin. Credit Union of Cascadia, the same director who judged the prison pitch, ran weekly clinics for returning citizens. Ethan signed up before unpacking. He spent the first night staring at water stains on the ceiling, repeating the numbers. 40 months reduced to 33. 33 reduced to now. The math of freedom still shocked him. Learning to walk again. Day 2, he rode a borrowed bike to the credit union branch. The lobby smelled of pine cleanser and possibility. Ms. Delgado, the director, remembered him. "We start with a secured card," she said, sliding a brochure across the desk. $200 limit, reports to all bureaus. Show 18 months of on-time payments and we'll talk microloan for your venture. Deal? Ethan signed before the ink finished flowing. He resurrected his prison-polished business plan under a new name, Sundial Digital, and printed 10 one-page flyers at the library. The first dozen coffee shops and boutiques eyed him politely, then said they managed marketing in-house. Thank you. On Hawthorne Boulevard, a Vietnamese bakery owner read the flyer twice, tapped the restitution clause at the bottom, 60% of net profit remitted to victim trust each quarter, and said, "Come back Saturday at 6 a.m. We talk over Banhow." My! Ethan bowed his head, oddly grateful for the pre-dawn hour. Less chance anyone would recognize the disgraced eco-fund fraudster. The meeting turned into his first contract: social media strategy, website refresh, budget $400 a month. Small but real. That night, he logged the agreement, transferred $240 into the restitution trust, and felt a click inside his chest, like a bolt sliding home. Thin ice under warm sun. Progress was fragile. A former investor spotted him at a farmer's market, hissed Thief loud enough to stall foot traffic. Ethan stood still, letting the word wash over him until the man stormed off. At Bridgeview, 2 residents mocked his PowerPoint hustle, bragging that roofing gigs paid cash. He borrowed their sander on weekends, refinishing diner tables for tips, every dime mapped to debts. Technology humbled him daily. He fumbled, tap-to-pay terminals, misread Slack threads, and once accidentally live-streamed his own bewildered face to a client's Instagram story. He apologized, fixed it, kept moving. Long work, Alvarez had said, brick by brick. First light with Maya. Graham arranged the reunion at a public park, midday, safe and neutral. Maya Ocean Blake, now 3.5, came running in a yellow raincoat, curls bouncing. Ethan knelt. She halted a meter away, eyes wide. "Hi, Maya," he managed. She scanned him head to toe. "Mommy said you were somewhere far. Are you still far?" "I was." His voice wobbled. "Now I'm closer, if it's okay with you." She looked to Isabel, who nodded gently. Maya stepped forward, handed him a crayon drawing. 2 figures holding balloons, a dog, and something that might be the sun or a giant cookie. "This is us," she announced. Ethan's throat tightened so hard he could barely say thank you. They spent an hour feeding ducks. He told her why geese flew in V-shapes, leaving out prison fences and restitution schedules. When goodbye came, Maya hugged his leg with sudden fierceness. He closed his eyes and let the small arms burn a brand of hope onto skin and bone. Isabel lingered. "I read your quarterly report," she said, rain misting her hair. "Victim's note shows first disbursement arrived." Ethan nodded. "It'll keep coming." She studied him, as though measuring how much of the old glitter still clung. "Maya asked if you'll come next week." His answer flickered past fear, pride, uncertainty, settling on truth. "Yes, same time. Every week I'm allowed." She half smiled, not quite trust, but closer than before. "See you then, Ethan. Cold wind, steady flame." Winter rolled in. Contracts trickled. An indie bookstore, a bike repair stall, a nonprofit thrift shop, none glamorous, all grateful. Revenue stayed lean. Restitution checks cleared. The trust spreadsheet crawled leftward, pennies against the mountain, yet undeniably moving. Bridgeview curfew felt tighter each night, but discipline saved rent. He sketched a timeline. 9 more months, secured card flips to standard, microloan. Funds a shared workspace, 20 clients by year 2. Above the timeline he pinned Maya's drawing. Beneath it, a quote from Ms. Herrera's sentencing notes. "Regret is measured by action." On New Year's Eve, he stood on the Morrison Bridge, city lights flickering over the Willamette like coins on dark water. Fireworks thumped in the distance, fleeting, bright, gone. He zipped his coat tighter, feeling both the bite of January wind and the unfamiliar warmth of standing here legally, sober, owing the world but hiding nothing. His phone buzzed. A text from the bakery owner. Instagram orders up 35%. Happy New Year, Mr. Sundial. Another from Isabel. Maya fell asleep before midnight. She said to tell the moon Daddy is working hard. Ethan laughed, the sound pluming white into icy air. He typed back, "Tell her the moon said keep shining. See you." Sunday. Below, river currents churned cold and relentless, carrying memories of shortcuts taken and bridges burned. Above, the skyline pulsed, steel, glass, possibility. Ethan Blake closed his eyes, inhaled city and winter and hope in one deep breath, and stepped off the bridge walkway toward whatever long work tomorrow required. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Small Acts, Big Change. February sunlight slanted across Portland like a shy guest, thin, uncertain, but undeniably present. Ethan Blake felt the same way. 4 months out of prison, he no longer flinched at bus brake hiss or the metallic rattle of construction scaffolds. Yet every morning he woke half convinced the city might rescind his parole and fold him back behind bars. Habit told him to sprint. Hard-won wisdom said walk. He chose walking. The ripple starts close to home. Bridgeview's thermostat failed the week after Valentine's Day, and frigid air seeped through drafty windows. Most residents grumbled, but Ethan remembered laundry shifts in Sheridan where steam pipes froze solid. He dug out a half roll of weather strip tape from a diner project, sealed vents, brewed communal coffee, and left a note. Stay warm. E.B. The gesture cost $7.15. Yet that night 2 skeptical bunkmates asked how credit scores worked. By lights out, he had 3 new spreadsheets on his flash drive and the beginnings of Bridgeview's first unofficial Money 101 circle. On Sundays, he kept a sacred appointment, 2 hours in Laurelhurst Park with Maya and Isabel. They fed squirrels, hunted heart-shaped leaves, and drew hopscotch courts in chalk. One drizzly afternoon, Maya tugged Ethan's hand toward a woman struggling to start an old Toyota. "Daddy, fix?" she chirped. Ethan knew nothing about engines, but he flagged a passing cyclist who did. 20 minutes later, the Toyota sputtered to life. The driver, owner of a print shop, asked what Ethan did for a living. 3 days later, Sundial Digital landed a retainer to revamp her e-commerce site. Isabel noticed the incremental wins. Over thermos cocoa, she said, "You're planting acorns." Ethan shrugged, embarrassed by praise, but she pressed on. Big forests start small. Her smile no longer carried the brittle courtesy of early visits. Something warmer glowed there. Caution, yes, but also pride. scaling human-sized. Spring delivered milestones in careful half-steps. The credit union of Cascadia approved Ethan's microloan, $5,000, collateralized by the Restitution Trust and co-signed by Graham. He rented a single desk in a co-working loft above a vegan shoe boutique. The space smelled of kombucha and ambition. He framed 2 documents on the wall, the Entrepreneurship Program diploma and the Victim Trust Ledger, showing 3/4 of on-time payments. Instead of hiring full-time staff, Ethan posted a flyer at Bridgeview, part-time digital content. Work, fair pay, no experience needed, returning citizens encouraged. 4 residents signed up. He taught them Canva layouts, caption writing, ad target basics. The first project, a social campaign for a zero-waste refill store, tripled its online engagement in a month. The store's owner sent an email at 2 a.m. Didn't know ex-felons could outperform agencies with ping-pong tables. Tell your crew they're rock stars. Ethan printed the line, taped it above the coffee pot. Paying forward, not backward, May marked the anniversary of Maya's birth. Isabel invited Ethan to the party. Just 12 kids, finger paint chaos, a carrot cake volcano. At the edge of the lawn, Graham stood sipping lemonade. He nodded toward Ethan's phone, which vibrated with a transaction alert. Sundial's latest restitution deposit cleared. "You're ahead of schedule," Graham said. Ethan exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Later, when the candles were blown and icing smeared across every cheek, Maya climbed onto Ethan's lap. "Mommy says you build websites for nice people," she announced. "Are you a nice people now?" The yard hushed, adult ears angling. Ethan kissed the crown of her hair. "I'm practicing every day," he said. Maya seemed satisfied. She presented him with a lopsided papier-mâché sun she'd made at preschool. "So you remember to shine." He promised he would. That night, Isabel walked him to the gate. "She never asks about the past," she murmured. "Only what tomorrow looks like." Ethan nodded. "Tomorrow looks better than yesterday." Silence lingered, soft, unhurried. Finally, Isabel said, "We're repainting the spare room. If you wanted to help, there's a roller with your name on it." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a doorway, and he stepped through with a grateful heart. When the world knocks. Again, June delivered a test. A venture capitalist, old contact from the gallery days, emailed an offer. Rapid scaling capital for Sundial, 7-figure potential, minimal oversight. The terms sparkled like fool's gold. Quick expansion, national. Reach, but a clause buried deep allowed profit redistribution before restitution payments. Ethan's pulse kicked up that familiar drum. Scale, dominate, impress. He spent a sleepless night tallying possibilities, then pictured the jazz drummer, the retired teacher, Maya's son. By dawn he replied, "Respectfully decline. Come back." When the clause reads after. The VC never wrote again, and Ethan felt lighter for the loss. Roots and branches. Summer solstice found Sundial managing 11 clients, 4 part-time trainees, and a waiting list. Ethan rotated 40% of net profit into the trust, 20% into savings for Bridgeview residents' first-month rent grants, and just enough into his own living expenses to secure a micro-studio downtown. No curfew, but still walking. Distance to Maya's preschool. On move-in day, Snowcap, now out, real name Arthur, showed up with a houseplant and a joke about accountants finally going green. They set up the lone bookshelf and ordered cheap Thai. Between bites, Arthur confessed he still feared relapse into clever shortcuts. Ethan opened the restitution dashboard, showed the slow but steady bar climbing toward full repayment. "Shortcut is anxiety in costume," he said. "Long work is peace you can sleep beside." Arthur asked if Sundial needed a bookkeeper. Ethan grinned. "Let's plant another acorn." Night on the waterfront. Late August, Ethan took Isabel and Maya to the Portland River Fest. Lanterns floated on the Willamette, each carrying a handwritten wish. Maya scrawled more playgrounds. Isabel wrote calm hearts. Ethan paused over his blank rice paper square. In small letters he inked, "Finish the bridge I burned." They launched the lanterns, watching them drift like tiny constellations on black glass. Isabel slipped her hand into his, not woven fingers, but resting, gentle, real. They stood in silence until the last light disappeared around the river bend. Measure of a year. Autumn leaves crisped gold when the victim trust ledger hit 53% repaid. Ethan printed the statement and mailed copies to every claimant with a note. "Halfway home because you held me accountable. Thank you for patience. See you at the finish line." Replies trickled back. Postcards, cautious encouragement, one hand drawn. Drum icon signed "Encore awaits." Bridgeview's counselor invited Ethan to speak at a graduation ceremony for departing residents. He told them shortcuts promise speed, but potholes break axles. He told them a $400 bakery contract could be a seed for forests of goodwill. He ended with Maya's words, "Are you a nice people now?" and left the mic shaking in his hand while applause rose like rain on a tin roof. That night, he walked the empty length of Alberta Street, cool wind teasing jacket edges, thinking how small acts, weather strip tape, banh mi meetings, declined. Term sheets had spliced a broken life into something quietly resilient. He was still paying, still learning, still prone to late-night heart races when old arrogance knocked. But each sunrise he placed another brick, a truthful invoice, an honest apology, a bedtime story read over video chat when work ran late. Near midnight, he paused under a street lamp and phoned voicemail number 7 on his contacts. The jazz drummer. Beep. Mr. Ellis, Ethan Blake here. Quick update. Your restitution percentage just cleared another 500. I'll stop calling when the meter hits 100. Hope the new gigs swing. He hung up, smiling at the thought of cymbals in some bar lighting the dark with sound. He turned toward home, the city settled around him, bridges arching like forgiven mistakes, river whispering patient currents. Small acts had not changed the world, but they had begun to change his world, and the orbit of every soul tethered to his, and that, Ethan realized, was already big. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Quiet Legacy. The final restitution payment cleared on a wind-brushed morning the following April. 2 years to the day since Ethan Blake stepped out of Bridgeview with $53 and trembling resolve. The bank's confirmation ping shimmered on his phone at 7:12 a.m. A single line of text. Trust balance 0.00. He stood in Sundial's one-room studio, light slanting through skylights onto desks still scarred by earlier tenants, and let the silence bloom. No cheering staff, no champagne spray, just the low hum of an air duct and a heart that, for the first time in years, wasn't sprinting. He drafted an email to every claimant, paid in full. Thank you for teaching me the weight of promises. He typed and retyped the closing. With steady gratitude, Ethan Blake, then hit send. A minute later, a reply landed from the jazz drummer Ellis. Encore achieved. Grab a stool any Friday. First set's on me. Ethan laughed out loud, the sound bouncing off painted brick. Passing the baton. By summer sundial, digital no longer fit its single desk. 9 employees, 6 formerly incarcerated, shared a sunlit warehouse corner in Northeast Portland. Clients waited months for slots, drawn less by Ethan's former infamy than by Sundial's open ledger model. Every quarter, the agency published a pie chart showing profit slices to staff, community grants, and a bridge fund that seeded startups. Launched by ex-offenders. Journalists asked for interviews. Ethan declined them all. The work talks, he said. I'm just one of the laborers. One June afternoon, Ms. Delgado from the credit union visited to sign paperwork for a revolving micro-loan pool. She noticed the framed victim trust statement now hung beside Maya's sun drawing. Keeping score? she teased. Ethan shook his head, keeping perspective. She smiled, stamped the forms, and left with a handshake that felt like the closing of a very long loop. A house where doors stay open. That same month, Graham called. The Cliff House near Cannon Beach, empty since its conversion into a conservation trust, needed a resident caretaker to manage educational tours and artists in residence. "Isabel thinks you'd be good," he said. Ethan stared at the phone, memories of vows spoken under salt wind swirling like gulls. "You sure?" Graham's voice softened. "Legacies need gardeners." They moved in July. Isabel painted the west wall of the living room with rolling whales. Maya, now 5, arranged smooth beach stones in spirals across the deck. Ethan commuted to Portland twice a week and spent dawn hours guiding school kids along tide pools, explaining barnacles, with the same clarity he once reserved for ROI curves. He discovered that tilting a flashlight under wet kelp felt more thrilling than sealing six-figure contracts. One salty morning, Maya raced up the path from the sand clutching a crab shell. "Put it in your office, Daddy." Ethan placed it beside a cedar frame containing the phrase, "Long work, peace you can sleep beside." The shell's edge caught the light like stained glass. Circles completed. Autumn brought a letter from Arthur Snowcap, now accounting manager at a Seattle co-op. Inside was a check marked "Donation to Bridge Fund," repaying kindness plus 5% interest. Ethan folded the note into his jacket and walked the shoreline until twilight blued the water. Waves erased footprints behind him, a reminder that repair means leaving gentler marks. In October, the Oregon governor's office invited Ethan to join a re-entry policy board. He declined the title, but offered to teach a quarterly workshop inside Sheridan, the same chapel where hope first resurfaced. Standing at that lectern months later, he saw men with jumpy eyes and folded arms, the way he must have looked, and opened with, "You already know shortcuts. Let's map the scenic route." Some smiled, some scowled. By the end, every seat held a business draft, even if it was just a barbershop on paper. Ethan collected the pages and promised to mail feedback. Every scribble tended like a seed. That quiet celebration. New Year's Eve came again, fog whispering over the Pacific. Isabel fried hush puppies. Maya arranged battery candles along the windowsill. At 10:30, Graham arrived, carrying a weathered wine bottle saved from their wedding but never uncorked. Label read Second Horizon. On the deck, they toasted without speeches. The ocean boomed in the dark, indifferent yet inviting. When Maya drifted to sleep, Isabel and Ethan lingered by the railing. Far down the coast, fireworks bloomed silently, pinpricks of red, green, gold. Isabel slid a small velvet pouch into his palm. Inside lay the wedding ring the county jail once tagged as property. The gold band had been re-etched on the inner curve. Long work wins. Ethan swallowed against a rising tide of emotion. I don't know if I've earned this back. Isabel leaned into his shoulder. Earning isn't past tense, she said. It's breath by breath. He slipped the ring on. It felt neither heavy nor light, just correct, like a properly hung door that finally swung without creak. Planting tomorrow. Spring returned, and with it the first cohort from Bridge Fund's incubator. A vegan skate shoemaker, a mobile car wash, duo, and a coder who'd built an app mapping free community meals. They gathered at the Cliff House for a retreat. Ethan watched them brainstorm around driftwood tables and realized none of them asked about his prison record. They cared only about guidance, Wi-Fi, and coffee. Legacy, he understood, was not what people remembered about him, but what they built after him. That night, he stood alone on the sand, cold surf foaming over his boots. He thought of the hollow ambition that once drove him, of Dominic Shaw, whose name was now a footnote in a cautionary podcast, of his parents' gentle voices long gone, and of Maya's question, "Are you a nice people now?" The sea answered with hush and thunder. He knelt, scooped a palm of wet sand, and let it run through his fingers. Impermanent, yet part of something immense. A quiet legacy, he realized, is like seawater reshaping rock. No headlines, just persistence, the steady reinscription of what a life can mean. Behind him, lights glowed in the Cliff House windows. Isabel reading on the couch, incubator founders planning tomorrow, a child asleep beneath a papier-mâché sun. Ethan turned, heart calm, and walked up the path toward the home he never thought he'd deserve, carrying nothing flashy, only the patient weight of promises kept. End of Chapter 10. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.